Hello and welcome to the September 24th edition of the AWS Cluster API Provider Implementers Office Hours. Um, Most of the agenda today is related to the MVP. If anybody has any additional agenda items, please add them to the list now. And also, please add yourself to the attending list on the meeting notes as well. All right, to start off, we're going to dive into the current status of the AWS Provider MVP. As of last week, I was able to get most of the work done for a custom Cloud Init module for kubeadm. There are some links in the agenda as far as some of the more details around that. It's currently a fork of Cloud Init that adds the kubeadm module. I've also built a Copper repo and a PPA repo for both RPM-based distributions and Debian-based distributions to be able to install the Cloud Init module. And I have a PR out there to update the image baking that we have in Tree to install that Cloud Init module. And I've tested it so far for both the init and join workflows. And we've also made some additional work on the cluster actuator. Can you speak a little bit to that, Vince? Because you've been driving most of that work so far.
Yep, sure. So currently, I'm mostly trying to finish up the routing tables. Nadir contributed the NAT gateways. Then we did the internet gateways, and now the routing table is just to put everything together. After this, it's mostly it's going to be some work around security groups, which we'll need some docs around it. So I'll try to get that in before code it out, I guess, just to get some, okay from multiple folks.
All right, thank you, Vince.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So moving on, upcoming MVP work that we have. I personally am going to be working on integrating the Cloud Init work that I've done into the machine actuator. And as Vince has already mentioned, we're going to continue some work on the cluster actuator, especially around the security groups. And then hopefully we'll mostly be in kind of tying off loose ends mode and testing and validation at that point. Now, I did have some implementation questions, especially as we start wiring up the Cloud Init module, because currently the Cloud Init module just kind of drives kubeadm, either a init or join operation based on a provided config. We do have to solve some of the problems of how do we get data out of the cluster, specifically around the bootstrapping information, CA certificates, admin kubeconfig, potentially bootstrap tokens and all of that stuff. One of the things I wanted to try to avoid doing, which has been previously done with most of the provider implementation so far, I want to try to avoid storing a separate set of SSH credentials that has the cluster or the machine actuator actually SSHing into the remote instance and performing operations in that manner. There's a few different options that we could pursue there. We can push some of this data into an S3 bucket as part of the Cloud Init bootstrapping. We can leverage AWS Systems Manager to run some commands remotely and also provide kind of a two-way type of communication between the instance and that. That introduces some potential complications around additional IAM profile requirements on the node. It also requires an actual agent be installed on the machine. So at this point, I haven't dug too far into it, and I'm not quite sure yet if the benefits of it and the ability to run commands remotely outweighs kind of the negative aspects of those additional requirements that it puts on there.
What commands do you need to run?
Well, so the big thing would be is how do we validate that the Cloud Init module has completed, either successfully or failed? and then how do we get, for example, like the admin cube config from the install done. And kind of the next point I have on there is one of the options we have is just kind of punting on it and solving this problem after the MVP. So for example, we can just pre-generate kind of those secrets that we need within the machine actuator, or the machine actuator for the initial control plane instance, and kind of, or even within the cluster actuator itself, and just kind of inject the needed secrets into the Cloud Init config. And then we can just kind of do a naive polling of the instance. You know, for example, for the control plane instance, we can just poll for the API server availability and that we can connect successfully to it, and then have some type of a timeout indicate failure of that. And that would provide just kind of like a naive way to kick the can down the road and solve some of these problems better after the MVP. And I'm interested in hearing some people's thoughts on that.
It's the way most of the deployers work. They basically poll for status and then they time out. That's the way all of the GCP deployers that I'm aware of do. And same with most other AWS deployers.
Yeah, I just hate the user experience of that, because we really can't provide much more information to the user than kind of, hey, we can't really do anything, and maybe provide a flag to not delete the instance on failure and just point the user to try to blindly debug that. But again, this is an MVP too. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts, if you have any in this area, Nadir.
Some of my colleagues have done a lot with SSM, so I can probably find out what that is. I would imagine there's quite a few things you would need to bootstrap in terms of like creating munbooks and things. Possibly, might be a bit annoying. I think I would definitely, instead of using an S3, use parameter store to store those secrets, and we can scope the IAM policy to maybe some prefix that we use, like that looks like the standard tags that you've written in that document around how we do idempotency. So I think that's currently best practice. If you look at the well-architected framework, that's what AWS recommend these days.
All right. Yeah, I was a little concerned when I looked at parameter store that we wouldn't be able to necessarily have a sane way to update that directly from the instance.
Oh, sorry, I lost you there.
What was that? I think we might have lost you, Nadir. Oh, are you back?
Oh, hi. So I lost the internet for the last minute.
No worries. Yeah, I looked at parameter store for a little bit, but I wasn't sure if there was a way that we could safely allow values there to be updated from an instance itself rather than from an external, from the actuator.
Yeah, sure. As long as they've got the correct IAM permission, and they won't need anything more than the AWS CLI, potentially.
Okay. All right. I'll definitely add that to the list of things that we can evaluate. What do you see as kind of an importance there? Do you think we can kind of punt that and go the naive route for the MVP, or do you think we should have some a little more robust?
I think the polling's probably fine for MVP. I think I would, if we can definitely try and avoid SSHing in, that'd be great though. Yeah,
that was my thought. Like having to manage an extra set of SSH credentials would even complicate like remote access to the machines for an admin and things like that. So I was trying to avoid that. And we don't necessarily want to take just user credentials and put them into the actuator and have them, be like a long running kind of requirement as well.
Yeah, and I think we also then solve control plane in private subnet by default then as well.
Yep. All right. Well, I appreciate your input. Are there any other topics that anybody wanted to bring up? No? All right. Well, then I think we can call it short for today and just keep on moving with the implementation. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week.